What if everything you believed about getting old was wrong? That question swirled in Frank Dalton's mind as he sat alone in the dim light of his cluttered garage. The air smelled faintly of rust and engine oil, mixed with the faint, comforting scent of old paper, blueprints he hadn't touched in years. Outside, the sun was setting, casting long orange shadows across his neighborhood, a quiet cul-de-sac where houses stood like silent witnesses to lives lived and faded. Frank, at 67, felt like one of those shadows, there but unnoticed, slowly disappearing. The hum of distant lawnmowers and children's laughter on the street felt foreign to him now. He was a man caught in the limbo between past purpose and present invisibility. His late wife, Mary, had passed 5 years earlier, and with her gone, the house felt hollow, each room echoing memories he wasn't sure he wanted to keep. His children, Greg and Lisa, were wrapped up in their own busy lives, their calls sparse and businesslike. They saw their father as a relic, a man who'd done his time and now needed to step aside. Frank often felt like he was waiting for a final call to fade away. But tonight was different. Tonight, something unusual stirred inside him. His hands, once steady and sure as he designed aerospace components at NASA decades ago, now trembled slightly as he fumbled with his old iPad, its cracked screen flickering under his fingers. He'd been searching for something, a sign, a spark, anything to remind him he still mattered. The screen lit up with a headline, Elon Musk, Grok AI was asked about Jesus. Here's what it replied. Curiosity pulled Frank closer. Elon Musk, a name synonymous with boundless ambition and fearless reinvention, seemed worlds away from Frank's quiet suburban life. But the video was brief, a clip pulled from a podcast where Elon explained how the new AI, Grok, had answered a question about Jesus, not with religious doctrine, but with something deeper, something revolutionary. Frank listened to the AI's reply. Jesus would not wait to be accepted. He would disrupt everything, with love and radical clarity. The words echoed inside him like a distant bell, stirring a heat long dormant. Could it be that someone so fearless, so relentless, could inspire even a man who felt like time had passed him by? Frank's eyes wandered around the garage, the old rocket models gathering dust, the forgotten tools, the stacks of notebooks filled with designs he had never built. He remembered a promise he had made to Mary years ago, back when dreams seemed endless. We're never too old to build something big. Back then, he had believed it. Now, it felt like a lie he told himself to keep going. Yet that spark from Elon's AI stirred a different thought. Maybe it wasn't a lie. Maybe he had just stopped believing it. Frank's mind flashed to the early days of his career, a young man with bright eyes working on aerospace projects at NASA, dreaming of Mars, of new frontiers. He had seen the future then as something reachable. Now, the future felt distant, a planet orbiting beyond his grasp. The evening air grew cooler, and Frank pulled his worn jacket tighter around his shoulders. Outside, the streetlights flickered on, one by one, illuminating the quiet neighborhood with pools of pale yellow. He tapped the screen again and saw comments flooding in from other viewers. Some mocked, some inspired, others skeptical. Too old to change, one read. Why bother, another said. But buried among the comments was something else, a community of seekers, people like Frank, searching for a spark of meaning. The screen glowed softly as Frank read a comment from a man in Ohio who wrote, "This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?" Frank's eyes welled up unexpectedly. What pushed him forward? The answer felt buried beneath years of disappointment and quiet despair. Was it memory? Hope? Fear? Maybe all of it. He closed the iPad and leaned back, his chair creaking under the weight of years and regret. His garage, once a place of dreams, now felt like a mausoleum of what could have been. But maybe, just maybe, it was time to light the last candle before the darkness. The sound of his own breathing filled the silence as he stared at the faded photograph taped to the workbench, a picture of him and Mary, smiling at a shuttle launch, her hand resting on his shoulder, eyes full of belief. "We're never too old," he whispered to the empty room. Outside, the wind picked up, rustling leaves against the garage door. The night waited, still and expectant. Frank's fingers brushed over the blueprints scattered across the bench. Tomorrow, he thought, tomorrow I'll do something. Something small. Something brave. The last light in the garage flickered on, a tiny flame in the coming dark. And for the first time in a long time, Frank felt a flicker of hope. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Frank woke to the faint hum of his old coffee maker sputtering in the kitchen, the scent of dark roast filling the small room like an old friend arriving without announcement. He sat at the table, alone as always, a single cup steaming before him. Outside the window, the morning sun stretched over the quiet cul-de-sac, children's laughter from the neighborhood park faint but distant, like a life he once lived but could no longer reach. The kitchen was modest and worn, a place where time had left its fingerprints, cracked tile, faded wallpaper, and a calendar pinned to the wall with a faded photo of Mars from a NASA brochure. Frank sipped his coffee, savoring the bitterness that grounded him to the moment. His routine was unchanging: coffee, the paper, a walk around the block, and then hours spent in his garage. He longed for something to break the monotony, but each day felt like a slow march toward irrelevance. Today, though, there was a stirring beneath the surface, a whisper from the night before when Elon Musk's words echoed in his mind. Maybe there was still room for something new. As he stepped outside, the crisp morning air brushed his cheeks, reminding him of how long it had been since he felt truly alive. He walked down the sidewalk, the sound of his footsteps mingling with distant chatter and the occasional bark of a dog. Passing by the corner convenience store, he overheard a group of younger men talking loudly. "Boomers just slowing everything down," one said, laughing harshly. Frank paused, feeling the sting of their words as though they were arrows aimed at his very soul. "Too old to keep up," another sneered. For a moment, Frank wanted to turn away, to retreat into the safety of his house, but instead, he held his head high and kept walking. Inside, the store smelled of cigarettes and old plastic, shelves stocked with snacks and cheap magazines. Frank bought a black coffee, a small comfort in his solitary mornings. Back outside, he found a bench under a maple tree and sat, watching families pass by with their busy lives. He thought about his own family. Greg, his son, always focused on numbers and bills, and Lisa, his daughter, who called mostly on holidays, her voice distant and distracted. Neither seemed to see the man beneath the gray hair and slowing hands, the man who had once dreamed of reaching for the stars. Frank's thoughts drifted to the past, to a time when he was young and full of fire, interning at NASA during the Space Shuttle program in the 1980s. He remembered late nights working alongside brilliant minds, the smell of jet fuel, and the hum of engines waiting to roar. Most of all, he remembered Mary, her smile bright as the launch pad lights, her voice promising, "We're never too old to build something big." Those words had fueled him then, but now, they felt like echoes from another lifetime. The bench beneath him was worn and splintered, just like his resolve, but something inside urged him to hold on. He pulled out the iPad from his jacket, scrolling through the comments on Elon Musk's video about Grok AI and Jesus. One comment caught his eye: "This story might just spark a new beginning." What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Frank's eyes softened. What pushed him forward? He thought of Mary's laughter, the dreams they shared, the hope that had once burned so fiercely. But he also thought of his own stubbornness, the refusal to accept that his best days were behind him. With a slow breath, he stood up and started the walk home. The neighborhood was waking up, mailboxes opening, sprinklers spraying, the scent of freshly cut grass filling the air. Frank decided to take a detour by the community center, where he used to volunteer teaching kids basic physics. The building looked newer now, vibrant with activity, but the memories inside felt distant. As he passed, he overheard a teacher speaking to a group of teenagers: "Remember, innovation doesn't care about age or background. It's about the fire inside. Frank's heart quickened. Maybe the fire hadn't gone out after all. Back home, Frank found himself drawn to the garage, a space cluttered with relics of his past, blueprints rolled up like ancient scrolls, half-finished projects gathering dust, and the quiet hum of forgotten ambitions. He ran his fingers over an old notebook filled with sketches of rocket designs, notes scrawled in his youthful handwriting. One page bore a sketch of a propulsion system he had once hoped to build, the lines shaky but full of promise. The memory of Elon's AI response surfaced again. Jesus would not wait to be accepted. He would disrupt everything, with love and radical clarity. The idea of disruption, of radical change, felt alien yet exhilarating. Could a man his age still disrupt? Could he still change the course of his life? Frank's fingers tightened on the notebook. That afternoon, he sat at the kitchen table and started writing an email to Maya, a young engineering student who had recently commented on one of his old Reddit posts. He hesitated but then typed. "Thank you for your kind words. It's been a long time since anyone saw value in these old designs." He paused, then added, "Maybe it's not too late after all." The send button felt like a leap into the unknown. Hours later, his phone buzzed with a reply, "It's never too late, Frank. Let's build something together." The words ignited a warmth he hadn't felt in years. That night, as Frank prepared for bed, he looked out his window at the stars shimmering above. They seemed closer, more reachable. He whispered into the darkness, "I'm ready." The moment it all changed had begun with a simple cup of coffee for one, but inside Frank Dalton, a revolution was stirring. Frank sat in the sterile exam room of Dr. Reynolds's clinic, the soft beep of the heart monitor mixing with the muffled voices outside. The doctor's face was kind but worn, eyes that had seen too many battles with aging bodies and broken dreams. "Frank," Dr. Reynolds began gently, "I know you want to keep pushing, but your heart's not what it used to be. You need to slow down. Your body isn't designed to keep up with those old ambitions." The words landed like cold stones, heavy and final. Frank clenched his fists, the echo of Elon Musk's relentless drive ringing in his mind. If something is important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor. But the doctor's voice cut through his resolve. "Age has limits, Frank. We have to respect them." The appointment ended with a prescription for rest and a referral to a cardiac rehab program, but Frank left feeling dismissed, like a ghost drifting through a world that no longer needed him. On the drive home, he flicked through news apps and social media, searching for distraction. A video popped up, a clip of Grok AI responding to a question about Jesus. The AI's words were different this time. He would be fearless in the face of doubt and opposition, acting with radical clarity and love. Frank paused the video and stared at the screen. Fearless. Radical clarity. Love. That was what he needed, not quiet acceptance. When he walked into his house, the silence greeted him like an old enemy. His phone vibrated, a text from Greg. "Dad, we need to talk about downsizing. The house is too much for you." The words stung worse than the doctor's warning. Greg's tone wasn't cruel, but it was firm, pragmatic. Frank knew what it meant: sell the house, move to a retirement community, give up the garage, the dreams, the memories. Frank's heart tightened. He remembered the nights he and Mary had spent planning futures filled with exploration, building, and discovery. Now those futures felt like distant stars, flickering out. That evening, Frank sat in the living room, the television playing a documentary on Elon Musk's latest SpaceX launch. Elon's voice, calm but fierce, echoed through the room. "Most people die at 25, we just don't bury them until 75. The words resonated deeply. Frank had lived 70 years, but had he really lived? The AI's response to the question about Jesus, someone who had changed the world despite overwhelming doubt and opposition, felt like a call to arms. Was Frank ready to fight for his own life again? The next morning, Frank shuffled to his computer and logged on to Reddit, returning to a thread where he had once shared old sketches and ideas. Comments flooded in, some encouraging, others dismissive. "Old man dreaming," one user sneered. "Move on." But beneath the noise was a message from Maya, the young engineering student: "Don't listen to the noise. Your ideas still have power." Frank felt a spark ignite. He responded carefully, asking if she would be interested in collaborating on a project. The reply was immediate: "Absolutely. Let's prove them wrong." Over the following days, Frank and Maya exchanged emails, sharing ideas, sketches, and encouragement. Frank was surprised at how quickly his mind sharpened, how the collaboration energized him. His days grew fuller, his steps lighter. But with each small victory came doubt. At the grocery store, he caught sight of his reflection: gray hair, wrinkled skin, tired eyes. Was he just fooling himself? One afternoon, his daughter Lisa stopped by unexpectedly. She surveyed the garage with a mixture of pity and concern. "Dad, I know you want to keep busy, but all this feels like denial." Frank looked at her, heart aching. "I'm not denying anything. I'm just not ready to disappear." Lisa shook her head gently. "We worry about you." That night, Frank lay awake, the house quiet except for the distant sound of crickets. He thought about the AI's words again and Elon's relentless drive. Maybe he wasn't invisible yet. Maybe he could still light a spark in the darkness. The garage beckoned. The blueprints whispered. The moment wasn't over. He just had to keep fighting. The morning sun crept through the faded curtains, casting pale stripes of light across the floor of Frank's garage. For the first time in years, he felt a restless energy humming beneath his skin, like an old engine sputtering to life after too long a rest. The night before, after long conversations with Maya, he had made a decision, not a grand one, but a small, defiant step that felt like a battle one. Today, he would start walking every day. Not a marathon, not a race, but simply moving forward. As he pulled on his worn sneakers, the weight of doubt tugged at him, whispering that his heart and legs might betray him, that he was fooling himself. But the words from Elon Musk's interview with Grok AI echoed in his mind: fearlessness isn't about never feeling fear. It's about taking action despite it. Outside, the air was crisp with early autumn, the scent of drying leaves and fresh earth filling the neighborhood. Frank's first steps were slow and deliberate, each footfall a small victory against years of stagnation. He walked past houses with children playing in their yards, couples sipping coffee on porches, life moving forward in waves he felt distanced from. Yet as he walked, he realized he wasn't just moving his body, he was moving something inside: hope, stubbornness, the memory of a man who had once reached for the stars. Day by day, Frank pushed himself a little further, the rhythm of walking becoming a meditation, a rebellion against the creeping invisibility of age. His neighbors noticed the change. Mrs. Patterson from down the street smiled and waved, and for the first time in a long while, Frank smiled back, feeling a flicker of connection. At night, he began documenting his journey, starting a simple blog titled "Second Launch." The name was a nod to the rocket launches he loved and the idea of life's second chances. The first posts were raw, admissions of fear, regret, and the stubborn hope that maybe he could still make a difference. Maya encouraged him relentlessly, sharing his posts and connecting him with others in the online maker community. Slowly, comments started to roll in from people inspired by his courage. Some were his age, others much younger, all united by the desire to rewrite the rules of aging. One message stayed with Frank: it's never too late to light a new fire. In the garage, Frank dusted off an old workbench, clearing years of clutter to make space for new projects. The tools, some rusty, some forgotten, felt alive in his hands again. He pulled out a battered notebook filled with sketches of a propulsion system he had dreamed of building but never finished. With Maya's help, they started updating the designs, integrating new technologies and ideas. It wasn't easy. Frank struggled with fatigue, frustration, and the creeping voice of self-doubt. But with every small breakthrough, the weight of invisibility lifted. One afternoon, Frank received a surprise call from Greg. The conversation was cautious at first. Greg worried about his father's health, the risks of chasing old dreams. But Frank shared his renewed purpose, his plans to build, to create, to connect. Greg listened, the tone shifting from skepticism to reluctant admiration. Maybe there's something to this after all, Greg admitted. That evening, Lisa stopped by again. This time, instead of pity, she brought a box of her old science books and a smile. "For your next project," she said. Frank's heart swelled. The family he thought had drifted away was circling back, drawn by the light he was rekindling. Weeks turned into months, and the blog's followers grew. Frank's story spread, a man who refused to fade, who found inspiration in unlikely places and challenged the assumptions of age. Through it all, Elon Musk's presence was never far, sometimes in quotes, sometimes in news clips, always as a reminder that boundaries are meant to be pushed. One evening, Frank sat alone in the garage, the soft glow of a desk lamp illuminating the pages of a new design. The smell of sawdust and metal filled the air, familiar and comforting. He felt the exhaustion of effort but also the thrill of creation. For the first time in a long time, Frank believed in tomorrow. The moment he had waited for, the spark Elon Musk had ignited, was now a roaring flame. He whispered to the empty room, "This is just the beginning." The morning light spilled through the cracked garage window, dust motes swirling in the golden rays like tiny galaxies drifting in a vast universe. Frank Dalton stood before his workbench, eyes scanning the progress he had made over the past few months, a clutter of tools, 3D, printed parts, and blueprints layered with new annotations. This was no longer the dusty graveyard of forgotten dreams, it was a workshop alive with possibility. The old propulsion system he had once sketched in youthful fervor was finally taking shape, reimagined with modern technology and fueled by the kind of stubborn hope only someone who had seen too much time slip away could hold. Yet today felt different. The familiar tremor of doubt crept in, whispering that he was playing a dangerous game, that maybe the world had moved on without him. But the voice of Elon Musk, echoing from countless interviews and tweets, whispered louder, "When something is important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor." Frank reached for his phone, scrolling through the messages from Maya and his growing circle of supporters. They were waiting for updates, inspired by the man who refused to bow to age or fear. The pressure was real, but it fueled him rather than crushed him. He remembered the day he decided to start walking, the first hesitant steps that had led him here. Each small choice had stacked upon the last, building a foundation strong enough to support this moment, the moment to truly cross the threshold from dreaming to doing. That afternoon, Frank felt a surge of energy and decided to take a chance. He would reach out to his son Greg, not just to share progress but to invite him into this world, to bridge the gap that years of silence and misunderstanding had widened. His hands trembled as he dialed the number, heart pounding with a mix of hope and fear. "Hey, Dad," Greg answered, the surprise clear in his voice. "I was just thinking about you." The conversation was awkward at first, the years of distance filling the pauses, but Frank pressed on, sharing his passion, his vision, and the small victories that had begun to light up his days. Slowly, Greg's tone softened, and by the end, he asked if he could visit the garage. The next day, Greg arrived, his skepticism tempered by curiosity. Frank showed him the updated blueprints, the prototype parts, and the blog that had become a beacon for others who refused to fade away. To Frank's surprise, Greg didn't just observe, he offered ideas, technical advice, even suggestions for outreach. The gap between father and son began to close with each shared moment. That evening, Lisa called again, this time inviting Frank to a local community event celebrating innovation and aging. "You have to come," she urged. "People need to see what you're doing." Frank hesitated but agreed, feeling the gravity of the invitation. The night of the event, Frank entered a crowded room filled with faces of all ages, united by the belief that life's chapters could be rewritten. He was nervous, the weight of years pressing on his shoulders, but as he spoke about his journey, the crowd leaned in, captivated by his raw honesty and fierce determination. A reporter approached afterward, intrigued by Frank's story. Within days, an article appeared online: "Retired engineer defies age, builds future in his garage." The response was overwhelming. Emails poured in from people inspired, challenged, and moved by Frank's courage. The invisible man was becoming visible again, a symbol of hope for those who felt left behind. But with the light came shadows. Not everyone was supportive. Some dismissed Frank's efforts as a midlife crisis turned late-life folly. Comments like, "too old to make a difference," and "living in the past," stung, but Frank remembered Elon's defiant words: "Some people don't like change, but you have to embrace it." The backlash only strengthened his resolve. Back in the garage, Frank and Maya worked tirelessly, turning blueprints into functioning models. The prototype thrummed softly on the workbench, a mechanical heartbeat echoing decades of dreams reignited. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Frank looked around at the life he was rebuilding, the connections, the projects, the community. He realized that this journey wasn't just about rockets or propulsion systems, it was about reclaiming identity, purpose, and hope. He whispered to the fading light, "I was never too old. I was just waiting for permission to matter again." Outside, the stars began to twinkle, distant and eternal, reminding Frank that no matter the years behind him, the future still stretched wide and waiting. The garage was bathed in the warm glow of a single overhead bulb, casting long shadows on the scattered tools and half-assembled components. Frank sat hunched over the workbench, his fingers trembling slightly as he tightened a bolt on the prototype propulsion unit. The metallic hum of the machine filled the room with an energy that was both new and strangely familiar, like the heartbeat of a dream coming back to life. Outside, the world moved on, indifferent to the quiet revolution unfolding in this small, cluttered space. Frank knew the journey ahead would not be easy. His body ached more often these days, his breath came quicker, and the whispers of doubt were relentless. Yet something stronger had taken root inside him, a spark that refused to be extinguished. It had started months ago with a single step, a simple choice to defy the narrative of aging and invisibility. The blog he'd started, Second Launch, had become a lifeline, connecting him to people around the country who were rewriting their own stories of later life. Maya's enthusiasm was a constant balm, her messages of encouragement and technical expertise reminded him he was not alone. That night, Frank received an unexpected call from Lisa. "Dad, I found something for you," she said, voice tinged with excitement. "There's a local makerspace hosting a technology showcase next month. They want you to present your project." Frank's heart pounded. Public speaking had never been his forte, and the thought of standing before a crowd made the old insecurities surface. But beneath the fear was a thrill, the chance to step into the light, to show the world he was still here, still capable. Over the next weeks, Frank poured himself into preparation. He refined his prototype, rehearsed his presentation, and leaned on Maya for support. Greg stopped by the garage more frequently, offering help and sometimes just sitting quietly, reconnecting in ways neither of them expected. The night before the showcase, Frank barely slept. Memories of Mary's encouraging words echoed softly in his mind: "We're never too old to build something big." The morning sun spilled through the window as Frank entered the bustling makerspace, its walls alive with energy, invention, and possibility. Tables lined with projects ranging from drones to 3D printed art surrounded him. Faces of all ages buzzed with excitement and curiosity. When it was his turn, Frank stepped onto the small stage, heart racing but eyes clear. He spoke about his journey, from feeling invisible and forgotten to rediscovering purpose through action, fueled by the boldness of visionaries like Elon Musk. He shared the story behind his propulsion system, the challenges he faced, and the community that had lifted him up. As he finished, the room erupted in applause, warm, genuine, and powerful. Afterward, people approached him with questions, praise, and stories of their own struggles and triumphs. Frank realized he was no longer alone in the dark. He had sparked a fire that was growing beyond the confines of his garage. Among the crowd, Maya smiled, her eyes shining with pride. Greg and Lisa stood close, their presence a silent testament to the bridges rebuilt. The night ended with an invitation from a local university to collaborate on further research, a door opening wider than Frank had dared hope. Driving home under a sky sprinkled with stars, Frank felt a profound peace. The invisible man was now visible, not just to others but to himself. He whispered into the night, "This is just the beginning." The spark that Elon Musk's words had ignited was now a beacon, illuminating a path forward, proving that no matter the years behind, the future still belonged to those bold enough to claim it. The morning after the Makerspace event, Frank awoke with a mixture of exhilaration and exhaustion. The applause still echoed in his mind, but his body reminded him sharply that he was no longer 25. His heart fluttered uncomfortably, a reminder of Dr. Reynolds's warnings. The following days were a blur of emails, invitations, and renewed energy, but also aching muscles, restless nights, and growing fatigue. The old voice of doubt crept back with venom, "You're too old. You can't keep this up." One evening, while scrolling through messages, Frank came across a new article about Elon Musk. It described how, despite repeated failures, Musk never gave up, embracing setbacks as necessary steps toward success. Frank thought about his own recent struggles. His body was faltering, but his spirit was relentless. "Failure isn't the end," Elon had said. "It's the chance to begin again, smarter." The analogy felt personal, a mantra for the battles Frank faced. Not just with his health, but with time itself. A few days later, Frank suffered a minor fall in his garage. A misplaced tool, a stumble over a loose wire, and suddenly he was on the cold concrete floor, sharp pain shooting through his hip. The moment crystallized the cruel paradox of aging, the drive to create clashing with a body that betrayed him. For a while, Frank questioned everything. Was this pursuit worth the physical cost? Was he fooling himself, chasing dreams better left to younger men? His family grew concerned. Lisa insisted he see a physical therapist. Greg suggested slowing down, even quitting. But Frank's heart beat to a different rhythm, the rhythm of defiance and hope. "I'm not done," he told them. "Not yet." The therapy was grueling. Every session pushed him to confront limitations he had tried to ignore. But with Maya's virtual encouragement and messages from the online community rallying behind him, Frank found resilience he didn't know he had. Slowly, he relearned how to move, how to protect himself, how to adapt. The propulsion prototype waited patiently on the bench, its potential undiminished. One night, after a difficult day of therapy, Frank sat alone in the garage. The silence was heavy until his phone buzzed with a new comment on second launch. "Your journey reminds me of Jesus' perseverance, walking a hard path for something greater than himself." Frank's eyes filled with tears. The AI's words about fearlessness and love echoed again. This was more than a project, it was a testament to enduring hope. Reinvigorated, Frank returned to the blueprints, adjusting designs to accommodate new ideas and physical realities. He built safety mechanisms into the prototype, symbolizing the balance between ambition and wisdom. Months passed, marked by small victories and setbacks alike. With each obstacle overcome, Frank's confidence grew. His family saw a transformation too, not just in his work, but in his spirit. The gap between them narrowed further, filled with understanding and renewed connection. One afternoon, Greg brought his own tools to the garage, and they worked side by side, laughter breaking the long silence of lost years. Frank realized that falling was not failure, rising was the true victory. He whispered to himself, "I was never too old. I was just learning how to stand again." The journey was far from over, but with every step forward, Frank was proving that age was not a cage, but a challenge to be met with courage, creativity, and unyielding hope. Days bled into weeks as Frank settled into a new rhythm, the slow but steady pulse of progress beating beneath the surface of his life. The once silent garage now buzzed with quiet activity, tools clicking, computers humming, voices exchanging ideas. Yet beyond the walls of his sanctuary, the world moved on, oblivious to the small revolution unfolding in a 72-year-old man's workshop. Frank often wondered who, beyond his immediate circle, was truly watching, listening, or caring. The blog, second launch, had attracted a modest but growing following, a patchwork community of dreamers, late bloomers, and those hungry for proof that it was never too late to ignite change. Comments arrived from all corners of America. "Your story gave me the courage to start painting again," wrote a woman from Oregon. "I'm 68 and just launched my first online business," shared a man from Texas. These voices became the unseen audience, a chorus that lifted Frank's spirit on the days when doubt threatened to swallow him whole. One chilly autumn morning, Frank received an unexpected invitation. A local public library wanted him to speak at a Stories of Reinvention event, a gathering celebrating the resilience of older adults chasing new dreams. The invitation felt like a lifeline, a bridge to a wider world beyond the garage and blog. Preparing for the talk, Frank wrestled with the familiar nerves. Public speaking was a mountain he had yet to fully climb. But Elon Musk's relentless approach to fear whispered in his ear, "If you're not scared, you're not doing it right." On the night of the event, Frank stepped onto the modest stage, the soft glow of overhead lights casting a halo around his silver hair. The room was packed with faces both young and old, many of whom carried their own stories of struggle and reinvention. Frank spoke candidly about the ache of invisibility, the sting of family distance, and the spark that Elon Musk's words had lit in him. He shared his journey, from hesitant steps in the neighborhood to the prototype humming on his workbench, from the fall that almost ended it all to the hands that helped him rise again. His voice trembled at times, raw with honesty. Yet as he spoke, something shifted in the room. The audience leaned in, nodding, eyes glistening with recognition and hope. When he finished, the applause was thunderous, not just for the man on stage, but for the courage to keep dreaming against the odds. Afterward, Frank mingled with attendees who approached him with gratitude and shared their own aspirations and fears. Among them was a woman named Evelyn, a retired schoolteacher who had recently taken up coding. "Your story reminds me that age is a number, not a sentence," she said warmly. "Thank you for showing us what's possible." The event sparked new connections, and Frank found himself invited to other community groups, podcasts, and local news segments. Each opportunity was a thread weaving him deeper into a tapestry of shared resilience. Yet, amid the growing attention, Frank remained grounded by the quiet work in his garage and the steady support of Maya and his family. One afternoon, as he was fine-tuning the propulsion system, a message popped up on his blog from a stranger named James, a young engineer inspired by Frank's persistence. James proposed a collaboration, a way to integrate cutting-edge AI into the project, pushing it beyond what Frank had imagined. The idea thrilled Frank. It was a reminder that reinvention wasn't just personal. It was a bridge between generations, a dialogue across time fueled by mutual respect and shared dreams. As Frank and James exchanged plans and ideas, the garage became a hub of intergenerational innovation. The old sketches intertwined with new code, and the propulsion system evolved into something more than a symbol. It became a testament to what happens when courage meets opportunity. Late one night, Frank paused in his work to reflect on the journey so far. He realized that the unseen audience had become visible, their voices a steady drumbeat propelling him forward. He whispered softly, "We are not invisible. We are the sparks in the dark." The road ahead was still long, fraught with challenges, but Frank no longer walked alone. His story, once a solitary flame, was now a beacon lighting the way for others to rise, create, and believe that it was never too late to change. Frank sat at the kitchen table, the hum of the refrigerator filling the quiet space as he stared at the screen of his laptop. An email from Greg awaited his attention, the subject line simple, "Can we talk?" His fingers hovered hesitantly before opening it, a swirl of emotions rising, hope, fear, longing. The relationship with his son had been a fragile thread stretched thin by years of silence, misunderstandings, and missed moments. Yet, beneath the tension lay a desire for connection neither had dared to voice. Greg's message was cautious but genuine, expressing a wish to understand Frank's new project and perhaps find a way to support him. For the first time in years, Frank felt the possibility of repair, not just in machines and dreams, but in family. They agreed to meet at a nearby cafe, a neutral ground where past wounds could be gently unpacked. When Greg arrived, the awkwardness was palpable. Frank's voice trembled as he shared his journey, the loneliness, the fall, the rediscovery sparked by Elon Musk's relentless pursuit of the impossible. Greg listened, the walls between them slowly softening. Over cups of coffee and tentative smiles, they began to bridge the chasms of time and silence. The conversation flowed, revealing shared regrets and unspoken hopes. Greg confessed his fears about Frank's health, while Frank admitted his yearning for approval and understanding. It was raw, imperfect, but real. Encouraged by this breakthrough, Frank invited Greg to visit the garage and see the propulsion system firsthand. That afternoon marked a turning point. As Greg examined the prototype, his skepticism gave way to admiration. Together, they discussed improvements and possibilities, the collaborative spirit weaving a new bond between father and son. Meanwhile, Lisa's support remained a steady force. She surprised Frank with a family dinner, bringing together old friends and relatives who had drifted apart. The gathering was filled with laughter, stories, and the warm hum of reconnection. In the weeks that followed, Frank found himself part of a growing circle, family, friends, and community members drawn by his courage and vision. The invisible walls that had once separated him from others began to crumble, replaced by bridges built on vulnerability and hope. At night, Frank often reflected on the journey from isolation to connection. The lessons from Elon Musk's life, the fearless pursuit of vision despite setbacks, resonated deeply. He realized that rebuilding relationships required the same courage as chasing dreams, persistence, honesty, and the willingness to face discomfort. One evening, as he and Maya sat in the garage, Frank shared his feelings. "I thought I was alone in this fight," he said softly. "But I'm learning that we build more than machines, we build lives, together." Maya smiled, her eyes bright with understanding. "That's the real legacy, Frank." The propulsion system, once a solitary endeavor, had become a symbol not just of innovation but of reconciliation and community. As the prototype neared completion, Frank felt a profound sense of purpose, proof that no matter the years behind, the future held room for healing and new beginnings. He whispered to himself, "I was never too old to rebuild what matters most." The crisp morning air filled Frank's lungs as he stood outside his garage, heart pounding beneath his worn jacket. Today was the day he would finally test the propulsion system he had spent years reimagining, building, and perfecting. The prototype rested on a makeshift launch pad, surrounded by a circle of friends, family, and a small crowd drawn by curiosity and hope. Lisa stood nearby, her reassuring smile a steady anchor, while Greg adjusted his glasses, clipboard in hand, ready to record data and offer support. Maya's voice crackled softly through a speakerphone, her encouragement bridging the miles between them. Frank's hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of the moment. This was more than a test flight, it was a testament to resilience, to decades of dreams deferred and reclaimed. He remembered the early days, the lonely walks, the fall that nearly ended everything, the spark ignited by Elon Musk's defiant words. "When something is important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor." He repeated this mantra silently as he checked the final connections, eyes scanning the prototype for any last-minute flaws. The crowd held its breath as Frank activated the control panel. A low hum rose from the propulsion unit, growing steadily into a powerful vibration that reverberated through the ground beneath their feet. The prototype lifted slowly, shaking with energy, and then, like a burst of sunlight breaking through storm clouds, it soared into the sky. Gasps and cheers erupted as the small craft traced a graceful arc against the blue. Time seemed to slow, each second stretching into a triumph. Frank's eyes welled with tears, the culmination of years of struggle and hope burning bright in that moment. The craft completed its flight, landing softly on a patch of grass beyond the launch pad. As the crowd rushed forward, Frank felt the profound truth settle within him. This was not just a machine, but a symbol of human spirit, of daring to dream and act, no matter the obstacles. Greg grinned, clapping Frank on the back. "Dad, you did it." Lisa's eyes shimmered with pride. "We all did." The media soon arrived, capturing the story of the man who refused to fade away, a story that resonated far beyond the small town where it all began. Frank found himself sharing his journey over interviews and podcasts, always circling back to the message that had carried him through: "I was never too old. I was just waiting for permission to matter again." That night, back in the quiet of his garage, Frank carefully disassembled the prototype, already dreaming of improvements and new possibilities. Maya's message pinged on his phone: "This is just the beginning. Keep flying." As he looked out at the stars glittering overhead, Frank felt the vastness of the universe beckoning, inviting him to keep reaching, building, and believing. The test flight was more than a milestone. It was a declaration that age was no barrier to purpose, that the flame of hope could burn fiercely in any season of life. He whispered softly, "Here's to new beginnings." And in that moment, beneath the endless sky, Frank Dalton truly felt alive. The success of the test flight rippled far beyond Frank's small town, touching lives and sparking conversations in places he never imagined. Messages poured into the second launch blog from readers inspired by his journey, retirees starting new ventures, parents reconnecting with estranged children, and young inventors encouraged to dream bigger. The story of a 72-year-old man refusing to fade away became a beacon for anyone feeling invisible, a testament to the power of perseverance and vision. One afternoon, Frank received an unexpected call from a local high school. The principal invited him to speak at a STEM workshop aimed at bridging gaps between generations and inspiring older adults to engage with new technologies. Frank accepted, nervous yet eager to share not just his story, but the lessons learned along the way. Walking into the school auditorium, he was greeted by a sea of curious faces, teenagers buzzing with energy and older adults sitting alongside them, eager for inspiration. The room pulsed with possibility. Frank began by recounting his journey. From the lonely kitchen where he first questioned his purpose, to the fall that almost ended his dreams, and the spark ignited by Elon Musk's relentless refusal to accept limits. He spoke candidly about fear, failure, and the courage to start again. His voice wavered with emotion, but grew stronger as he shared the triumph of the test flight and the community that had lifted him. Afterward, a spirited Q&A session brought heartfelt questions and stories. A young girl named Emily asked, "How do you keep going when people tell you you're too old or it's too late?" Frank smiled, the memory of his darkest moments fresh in his mind. "Because I believe the future belongs to those who refuse to give up. Age is just a number, it doesn't define our potential." An older man shared how Frank's story had motivated him to enroll in coding classes at the community college. A teacher talked about how this moment bridged divides, inspiring collaboration and mutual respect between generations. The event ended with applause that echoed long after the lights dimmed. Back home, Frank reflected on the day's impact. The journey had become more than personal, it was a movement, a shared awakening that transcended age. Elon Musk's fearless mindset had been the spark, but the fire was now fueled by countless stories and dreams, young and old. One evening, Maya and Frank connected over video call, discussing new ways to expand their outreach, virtual workshops, collaborative projects, and an online forum where people of all ages could share ideas and support each other's growth. The future felt boundless, woven with threads of connection and hope. In the quiet of the night, Frank looked out at the stars once more, feeling the pulse of generations linked by courage and vision. He whispered, "We are not alone. We are the echoes across generations, carrying the flame forward." The story of reinvention was far from over. It was a living, breathing testament to the truth that no matter where we are in life, the chance to rise, to build, and to inspire remains, waiting for those brave enough to seize it. Frank's story, once a quiet flicker in a small-town garage, had grown into a movement that transcended geography and generations. The second launch community blossomed into a vibrant network of individuals who refused to accept the limitations society often placed on aging. From retirees learning to code to artists rediscovering their creative spark, the revolution was quiet but undeniable, a refusal to fade quietly into the background. One chilly morning, Frank received an invitation from a major technology conference in San Francisco. They wanted him as a keynote speaker to share his journey alongside innovators of all ages. It was a thrilling but daunting prospect. Standing on a global stage, speaking to an audience accustomed to youth and novelty, Frank wondered if his message would resonate. Yet, beneath the nerves was a fierce determination fueled by Elon Musk's own defiant spirit. When something is important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor. Preparing for the conference, Frank reflected on how far he had come, from the depths of loneliness and self-doubt to this moment of recognition. He refined his talk to emphasize the power of mindset, resilience, and community. He wanted to inspire not just older adults, but everyone who felt trapped by fear or circumstance. The day of the conference arrived. Frank stepped onto the stage, the bright lights blurring the faces before him. He spoke with raw honesty about aging, invisibility, and the courage to defy expectations. He shared the story of the propulsion system, the fall that nearly ended his journey, and the connections forged through second launch. The crowd listened intently, their applause a powerful affirmation that his message transcended age. After the talk, Frank was approached by a group of young entrepreneurs eager to collaborate. They saw in him not just a symbol of perseverance, but a partner with wisdom and experience. Together, they began brainstorming ways to integrate Frank's propulsion technology with emerging AI tools, ideas that pushed boundaries and sparked new possibilities. Back home, Frank's garage became a hub of innovation, a bridge between generations fueled by shared passion and mutual respect. Maya continued to guide the technical side, while Lisa and Greg supported the expanding community around Frank's vision. The lines between mentor and student blurred as knowledge flowed freely in both directions. One evening, as Frank and Maya reviewed new designs, he marveled at the transformation, not just of the prototype, but of himself. The man who once felt invisible was now a catalyst for change, proof that purpose and passion could redefine life at any age. Frank's story was no longer just his own, it was part of a larger revolution, a movement of those who dared to imagine, to build, and to rise beyond limits. He whispered into the night, the unseen revolution is here. And it's just beginning. The future awaited, bright and boundless, ready for those bold enough to seize it. Despite the growing momentum around Frank's journey, the path forward was far from smooth. As his story gained attention and his prototype advanced, a new, more insidious challenge emerged: doubt, not just from others, but from within. One gray morning, Frank sat alone in his garage, the hum of unfinished projects filling the silence. The weight of exhaustion pressed heavily on his shoulders. His body ached in ways it hadn't before, the scars from his fall still reminding him of vulnerability. The adrenaline that once fueled his relentless drive was waning, replaced by creeping uncertainty. The relentless optimism that Elon Musk's example had inspired now wrestled with the harsher realities of age and time. Could he truly keep going? Was this dream worth the toll on his health and spirit? The voices of skepticism from friends, family, and even the wider community echoed in his mind. Lisa, ever supportive, urged caution. Frank, you need to listen to your body. This isn't a sprint, it's a marathon. Greg's concern was practical: maybe it's time to consider passing the project to someone younger, someone with more energy. Even some followers from the second launch community questioned whether pushing so hard was wise. The crowd that once cheered on his every move now whispered about the risks of burnout, the reality of limitations. The conflicting voices gnawed at Frank's confidence, planting seeds of doubt deep within. Late that night, he scrolled through old interviews and quotes from Elon Musk, searching for the spark that had propelled him so far. One phrase stood out: persistence is very important. You should not give up unless you are forced to give up. Frank pondered the difference between persistence and stubbornness, between courage and recklessness. He realized that the fight was not against age itself but against the fear of change and loss. With a deep breath, Frank reached out to Maya. Their virtual conversation was honest and raw. Maya reminded him that reinvention was not about denial but adaptation, about finding new ways to contribute and grow without losing oneself to exhaustion. Inspired, Frank took a step back from the relentless pace. He focused on self-care, physical therapy, and small, meaningful moments with family. The prototype waited patiently, its potential undiminished but no longer a source of pressure. Instead, Frank explored mentoring younger innovators, sharing his experiences and encouraging others to find their own paths. In doing so, he discovered a new purpose, not just to build machines, but to nurture dreams, to be a guiding light for those navigating their own crossroads. One afternoon, at a local community center, Frank led a workshop on resilience and creativity, weaving his story with lessons learned from both triumph and doubt. As he spoke, he saw in the faces before him the same struggle and hope that had defined his journey. He realized that true strength was not just in pushing forward relentlessly, but in embracing vulnerability and change. The chapter of doubt was not a defeat but a necessary passage, a moment to recalibrate, to listen, and to grow wiser. Frank smiled softly, whispering to himself, "I am not just persistence, I am patience. I am not just strength, I am grace." And with that, he stepped into the next phase of his remarkable story, ready to rise anew. The seasons shifted as Frank embraced a gentler rhythm, balancing rest with purposeful action. The stillness that once felt like surrender transformed into a quiet strength, a reservoir of calm that steadied his mind and fueled his creativity. Though the propulsion system project paused, the spark within Frank burned brighter than ever, no longer a blaze of frantic energy, but a steady flame of enduring passion. One crisp morning, a letter arrived from a local university's engineering department. They invited Frank to collaborate on a community innovation lab aimed at encouraging lifelong learning and cross-generational partnerships. The opportunity resonated deeply. It was not just about building machines anymore, it was about building connections, fostering curiosity, and inspiring transformation in others. Frank accepted, eager to contribute his wisdom and experience. At the university, Frank found himself among students and faculty who approached problems with fresh eyes and fearless enthusiasm. The energy was infectious, and the environment welcomed his decades of life experience as a vital asset rather than an obstacle. Together, they launched workshops, hands-on projects, and mentorship programs that bridged age divides. Frank's role evolved naturally, from builder and dreamer to teacher and guide. He found joy in watching others discover their own potential, seeing sparks ignite in young faces as well as seasoned ones returning to dreams long set aside. One day, while overseeing a design session, Frank encountered a young woman named Zoe. She was determined, bright, and grappling with her own doubts about pursuing a career in technology. They connected instantly, their conversations weaving between technical challenges and life's uncertainties. Frank shared his journey candidly, the falls, the fear, the moments when giving up seemed easier. Zoe listened intently, drawing strength from his resilience. Inspired by their exchange, they teamed up to develop a community outreach program encouraging older adults to explore emerging technologies in accessible ways. The initiative blossomed, drawing participants eager to learn coding, robotics, and digital storytelling. The lab became a hub of creativity and empowerment, where age was no boundary but a badge of wisdom. Outside the university, Frank's relationship with his family deepened. Greg and Lisa witnessed the transformation, not just in Frank's achievements, but in his peace and fulfillment. The bridges rebuilt years before now supported a foundation of trust and love stronger than ever. Maya's mentorship continued, her steady presence a reminder that growth was a journey best shared. One evening, as Frank walked home beneath a canvas of stars, he reflected on the lessons woven through his path. Elon Musk's fearless mindset had sparked his awakening, but the true transformation had come from embracing vulnerability, patience, and community. Frank understood now that every ending was a new horizon, every setback a seed for growth. Standing beneath the vast sky, he whispered, "I was never too old to change. I was just learning how to soar." The future stretched before him, open, inviting, and boundless. With steady hands and an open heart, Frank stepped forward, ready to explore the next chapter of his extraordinary life. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Frank's days at the University Innovation Lab unfolded like a tapestry of connection and growth. The laughter of students mingled with the thoughtful discussions of seasoned learners, creating a symphony of ideas and inspiration. Frank found himself at the center of this vibrant community, not as a hero or savior, but as a fellow traveler sharing wisdom earned through trials and triumphs. The outreach program with Zoe flourished beyond their expectations. Older adults, many of whom had long felt sidelined by rapid technological change, embraced the chance to learn coding, build robots, and tell their stories through digital media. Each participant brought a lifetime of experience, and as they engaged with new tools, they discovered untapped wells of creativity and purpose. The classroom became a sanctuary where age lost its weight and curiosity became the common language. Frank watched as friendships blossomed across generations. Young and old working side by side, bridging gaps and breaking stereotypes. The ripple effect was profound. Families reconnected as older participants shared their newfound passions at home, while younger learners gained respect for the resilience and wisdom of their elders. The community began to shift, embracing a culture that celebrated lifelong learning and mutual support. News of the program spread, catching the attention of local media. Interviews and features highlighted the transformative power of connection and the courage to embrace change at any age. Frank's story, once a quiet echo in a small town, now resonated across the region, inspiring others to step into their own journeys of reinvention. Despite the growing attention, Frank remained grounded. His greatest joy came not from accolades but from moments like watching Eleanor, a retired schoolteacher, build her first simple robot, eyes wide with amazement. Or hearing James, a veteran, compose a digital story honoring his family legacy, his voice trembling with emotion. Each success, no matter how small, was a victory over fear and invisibility. One afternoon, Frank received a letter from a former doubter, a local doctor who had once cautioned him to slow down. The doctor admitted that Frank's journey had challenged his own assumptions about aging and potential. He expressed gratitude for the inspiration and requested to visit the lab to learn more about supporting older adults' engagement with technology. The letter was a poignant reminder that change could ripple outward, touching even the most unlikely hearts. As spring blossomed into summer, Frank reflected on the profound shift not only in his life but in the lives of those around him. The propulsion system prototype, once the focal point of his ambition, now symbolized more than innovation. It embodied the power of persistence, community, and hope. One evening, standing on the university's rooftop garden, Frank looked out over the city lights. The noise and movement below were a reminder that life was ever-changing, a dance of endings and beginnings. He whispered to the night, "Every ripple starts with a single drop. And together, we create waves." The journey was far from over. The impact was growing, carried forward by countless hands and hearts united in the belief that it is never too late to rise, to dream, and to matter. The lab's energy pulsed around Frank like a living thing, each invention, each story woven into the fabric of something greater than himself. Yet, beneath the excitement, a quiet question began to take shape within him: what legacy was he truly building? One late afternoon, after a day filled with workshops and laughter, Frank found himself alone in the university's quiet garden. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the paths lined with blooming flowers. He sat on a bench, hands clasped, eyes gazing into the fading light. Memories stirred, of lost friends, years wasted in doubt, and the painful moments when he believed his time had passed. He realized that legacy wasn't just about accomplishments or recognition, it was about the echoes left in the hearts of others. The change sparked by his story was a living legacy, alive in every person rekindling a dream, in every bond mended, and in every new connection forged. The next morning, Frank shared his reflections with Zoe and the team. Together, they brainstormed ways to capture and preserve the stories emerging from their community, stories of transformation, courage, and rediscovery. They launched a digital archive where participants could record their journeys, creating a mosaic of experiences that would inspire generations to come. Frank worked closely with Maya and Greg to develop the platform, ensuring it was accessible and user-friendly. The process brought the community closer, each story a thread strengthening the fabric of shared purpose. Meanwhile, Frank's relationship with Lisa deepened in unexpected ways. They spent evenings revisiting old photographs and letters, uncovering forgotten moments of joy and struggle. Through these shared memories, they healed wounds and rebuilt trust, recognizing that legacy was as much about family and love as it was about achievements. One afternoon, as Frank guided a group through the storytelling workshop, he noticed a young man named Marcus hesitating. Marcus had struggled with self-doubt and a fractured relationship with his own father. Encouraging him gently, Frank shared his own story of lost connections and the power of reaching out despite fear. Marcus listened intently, finding courage in Frank's vulnerability. The moment crystallized the truth Frank had come to embrace: legacy was not fixed or distant, it was living, breathing, and ever-evolving, shaped by choices made in the present. As the seasons turned, the archive grew into a rich tapestry of voices, each story a beacon lighting the way for others. Frank often revisited the site, reading messages of gratitude and hope from around the world. The knowledge that his journey had sparked a ripple far beyond his own life filled him with quiet pride. One evening, standing before a group gathered for a community event, Frank spoke from the heart: legacy isn't about what we leave behind when we're gone. It's about what we build together, today. It's about the courage to change, the love we share, and the hope we inspire. The room filled with applause, but Frank's gaze settled on the faces before him, faces young and old, eager and wise, united by a shared journey of transformation. He realized then that his story was just one chapter in a greater narrative, a story of human resilience and connection that would continue long after he was gone. As night fell, Frank looked once more at the stars above, feeling the gentle embrace of time and possibility. He whispered softly, "My legacy is not mine alone. It belongs to all who dare to rise." And in that quiet moment, surrounded by the echoes of countless dreams, Frank Dalton knew that his journey had found its true meaning. Frank's journey had become a testament not just to reinvention, but to the fierce, unyielding fire that burns within all of us, no matter the years behind us or the obstacles ahead. As summer deepened, the University Innovation Lab thrived as a hub of ideas and camaraderie, but for Frank, the true victory was quieter: a deepening sense of purpose and a renewed spirit that refused to be dimmed by age or circumstance. One morning, after leading a session on resilience, Frank walked through the campus gardens, the warm sunlight dappling the paths and casting golden hues on the flowers. His thoughts drifted to the past, the moments of doubt, the physical pain, the long nights spent wrestling with fear, and yet here he was, standing stronger and more alive than ever. The words of Elon Musk echoed in his mind: "When something is important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor." It was not just about defying odds but about embracing the relentless fire within. The passion that refuses to be snuffed out by the ticking clock of age or the voices of naysayers. Later that day, Frank received an invitation to participate in a podcast series focused on stories of transformation and resilience. The host, a warm-voiced woman named Angela, asked Frank to share what had kept his fire burning through the darkest moments. Speaking into the microphone, Frank's voice carried the weight of lived experience. "It's that spark inside you, the part that remembers your dreams even when everything else tells you to let go. It's fearlessness in the face of failure, the courage to start again and again. I found it in Elon Musk's example, but it's in all of us." We just need to light the match. The podcast episode resonated deeply with listeners. Messages poured in from people of all ages who felt inspired to reignite their own passions, regardless of setbacks or years behind them. Frank was humbled by the connection his story fostered, realizing that the fire he spoke of was universal, a powerful force that bridges divides and fuels the human spirit. Back at the lab, Zoe and the team surprised Frank with a small celebration, his 73rd birthday. The room was filled with laughter, handmade cards, and the warmth of friendship. As Frank blew out the candles on a modest cake, he felt a surge of gratitude, not for the spotlight or achievements, but for the community that had become his family, for the second chances life had offered, and for the fire still burning bright within. That evening, as twilight painted the sky in soft purples and pinks, Frank sat alone on his porch, gazing upward. The stars twinkled like distant beacons, timeless and unwavering. He whispered a vow to himself, to nurture this fire, to keep dreaming, and to remind others that it is never too late to light their own flames. Frank's story was no longer just about a man rebuilding a rocket engine in a garage, it was about the unbreakable spirit within us all. It was about the power to rise, to create, and to inspire, regardless of the years behind or the challenges ahead. And as the night deepened, the fire within Frank glowed steadily, a beacon for all who dared to believe in the extraordinary possibilities of a life lived with courage and heart. The days that followed the birthday celebration brought a renewed momentum to Frank's life. The fire within him burned fiercely, pushing him to embrace new challenges while honoring the wisdom gained through years of struggle and growth. The Innovation Lab had become more than a project, it was a movement, a sanctuary where people of all ages discovered their potential and courage. Yet, Frank sensed there was a deeper turning point ahead, one that would test not just his resolve but the very essence of what he had built. One crisp autumn morning, Frank received a call that stirred both excitement and apprehension. A major tech foundation had taken notice of the lab's work and offered a grant to expand the outreach program nationally. The opportunity was immense but came with pressure to scale rapidly and prove tangible results. Frank wrestled with doubt. Could the community-driven spirit survive such rapid growth? Would the personal connections that fueled transformation become diluted in the rush to expand? Seeking clarity, Frank turned to Maya for counsel. Over coffee in a bustling cafe, they discussed the delicate balance between ambition and authenticity. Maya reminded him that the foundation saw the power in their work because it was rooted in real human stories, not just technology. Keep the heart in the center, she said, and everything else will follow. Empowered by this wisdom, Frank convened a meeting with Zoe, Lisa, Greg, and the extended team. Together, they crafted a vision that honored their founding principles while embracing growth, a network of innovation hubs across the country, each tailored to its community, connected by shared values of respect, inclusion, and lifelong learning. As plans took shape, Frank found himself at a crossroads. The scale and stakes had shifted, and the challenges felt daunting. He grappled with fears of losing control and becoming a symbol rather than a participant in the movement he'd helped create. One evening, alone in his study, Frank reflected on his journey. The words of Elon Musk came to mind once again: failure is an option here. If things are not failing, you are not innovating enough. This reminded Frank that growth demanded risk and resilience. With renewed courage, he embraced the turning point, not as an end but as a new beginning. He committed to leading with humility, openness, and a fierce dedication to the mission. Months passed in a whirlwind of activity: grant applications, community outreach, new partnerships, and pilot programs in cities across the nation. Frank traveled frequently, connecting with local leaders and participants, witnessing firsthand the ripple effect of their work. Each success, each challenge, reinforced the truth that the movement was bigger than any one person. Yet, the turning point also brought moments of exhaustion and doubt. During a difficult conference panel, Frank faced critics who questioned the feasibility of such ambitious goals for older adults and community-led innovation. Their skepticism stung, threatening to unravel his confidence. Afterward, Frank confided in Lisa, who reminded him gently, "Remember why you started. Let their doubt fuel your fire, not extinguish it. Drawing strength from those words, Frank recommitted to the cause, focusing on the stories of transformation that proved the skeptics wrong. One poignant encounter came during a visit to a rural town where a group of seniors had built a low-cost assistive device for mobility. Seeing their pride and joy reaffirmed the movement's impact in the most tangible way. Standing before a crowd of new supporters and lifelong learners, Frank spoke with heartfelt conviction. We are not defined by our age or the limits others place on us. We are defined by our will to change, to grow, and to lift each other up. This turning point is ours to seize. The room erupted in applause, a testament to the shared belief that together, anything was possible. As autumn gave way to winter, Frank felt the steady pulse of progress and purpose. The turning point had arrived, and with it, a deepened understanding that transformation, both personal and collective, required courage, patience, and relentless hope. Looking ahead, Frank whispered to the quiet night, "This is just the beginning. The best is yet to come." And with that, he stepped boldly into the future, carrying the fire within him like a torch lighting the way for all who dared to follow. The crisp air of early winter settled over the city as Frank navigated the bustling streets with a renewed sense of purpose. The national expansion of the innovation hubs was underway, and with it came both exhilarating possibilities and daunting responsibilities. Yet beneath the surface of the growing movement, Frank felt an awakening stirring within, a profound shift not just in his mission, but in how he saw himself and the world around him. One evening, after a long day of meetings and planning sessions, Frank sat quietly in his study, reflecting on the journey that had brought him here. The flickering candlelight cast dancing shadows across the room as memories of past struggles and victories intertwined with hopes for the future. It was then that an unexpected message arrived, a handwritten note from Eleanor, the retired schoolteacher who had built her first robot months earlier. In her simple words, Eleanor spoke of how the program had reignited a passion she thought was lost forever, how it had connected her to new friends and a renewed sense of self-worth. The note moved Frank deeply, a reminder that every story mattered, that every life touched was a spark in a greater fire. This moment crystallized for Frank the awakening he had been feeling, not just the growth of the program, but the transformation within himself. He realized that his true mission was not merely to create technology or inspire reinvention, but to awaken the dormant potential within every individual, no matter their age or circumstance. The awakening was about hope, the kind of hope that doesn't deny hardship but acknowledges it and chooses to move forward anyway. Inspired, Frank reached out to Maya, Zoe, and the team to share his vision of deepening the program's focus on emotional resilience and personal empowerment alongside technical skills. Together, they developed new workshops centered on storytelling, mindfulness, and community building, designed to nurture the whole person. The response was immediate and powerful. Participants reported feeling not only more skilled but more connected and confident, their inner fires stoked by the collective warmth of shared experience. One chilly morning, during a visit to a newly opened hub in a small town, Frank encountered Robert, a man in his late 70s grappling with loss and loneliness. Robert confided in Frank that he had felt invisible in his own family, forgotten by the rapid pace of change. Yet through the program, he discovered a voice he thought was gone, a spark of creativity that brought him joy and purpose. Frank listened intently, feeling the profound truth of Robert's awakening echo his own journey. Later that day, Frank shared these stories during a keynote speech at a national conference. His words carried the weight of lived experience and the hope of collective transformation. We are all more than the labels and limitations society places on us. Age is not the end of our story but a new chapter filled with possibility. The awakening is within each of us, the power to reclaim our purpose, our passion, and our place in the world. The speech resonated deeply, sparking conversations and commitments from leaders across sectors to support lifelong learning and inclusion. Yet, amidst the success, Frank remained humble, aware that awakening was an ongoing process, one that required continual nurturing and courage. One quiet night, as snow gently fell outside his window, Frank sat with a journal, capturing reflections and lessons from the journey so far. He wrote, the awakening is a light that flickers even in the darkest times. It calls us to remember who we are beneath the doubts and fears, to rise again and again with open hearts and brave spirits. As the chapter of awakening unfolded, Frank felt a profound peace settle within him, a knowing that the journey was far from over but that each step forward was a victory in itself. The fire within burned steadily, a beacon of hope for all who sought to awaken their own extraordinary potential. And as the city slept beneath a blanket of snow, Frank whispered to the night, "Awake, rise, and shine. The world is waiting." Frank awoke to the soft glow of morning light filtering through the curtains, the first rays of a new day promising possibility. Outside, the city stirred with the quiet hum of life beginning anew, and within him, a profound sense of completion mingled with anticipation. His journey, from a man weighed down by regret and invisibility to a beacon of hope and transformation, had reached a moment of transcendence. This was the new dawn he had long dreamed of, not just for himself but for every soul seeking purpose beyond the boundaries of age and circumstance. The innovation hubs across the country thrived as vibrant communities where curiosity blossomed and barriers crumbled. Frank's vision of interconnected spaces where people of all ages learned, created, and inspired one another had become a living reality. He often received letters and calls from participants sharing how their lives had changed, stories of rekindled passions, mended relationships, and newfound confidence that radiated like a sunrise over horizons once thought unreachable. One morning, Frank gathered with Zoe, Maya, Lisa, Greg, and the extended team in the university garden where it had all begun. The air was crisp with early spring, the scent of blooming flowers mingling with laughter and shared memories. They reflected on the journey, the setbacks that tested their resolve, the moments of doubt that demanded courage, and the victories both small and great that marked their path. Frank spoke with quiet conviction, "We thought this was the end of the road, but it was just the beginning of something far greater. I was never too old. I was simply waiting for permission to matter again, and that permission came from within." As they celebrated, a live stream from the latest innovation hub flickered on a nearby screen. Participants their shared projects born from the spirit of the movement. Assistive devices for aging in place, digital storytelling platforms preserving family histories, and intergenerational art collaborations that wove together diverse voices into tapestries of hope. Frank's eyes glistened with tears as he listened. The legacy he had built was not a monument of stone but a living, breathing force of connection and possibility. Later that day, Frank stood before a gathering of community leaders, supporters, and lifelong learners for a special event commemorating the program's impact. He spoke with the steady strength of someone who had journeyed through darkness and emerged into light. The true measure of a life is not found in youth or fame but in the courage to change, the will to dream anew, and the love we share with those around us. Each of us carries a spark, sometimes buried, sometimes dimmed, but always there. When we choose to ignite that spark, we create a new dawn, not just for ourselves but for generations to come. The crowd erupted in applause, a chorus of voices united in hope and determination. That evening, as Frank walked home beneath a sky ablaze with stars, he felt the quiet power of transformation ripple through every fiber of his being. The fire within him, kindled by Elon Musk's fearless example, nurtured by community and love, burned steady and true. In the stillness, Frank whispered a final truth: we are never too old to rise, to create, to inspire. The new dawn is ours to shape. And with that, he stepped forward into the radiant light of a future limitless and bright, ready to embrace whatever came next with open arms and an unbreakable spirit. The first snow of December dusted the campus rooftops as Frank stepped into the university auditorium. He had been invited to a live event called Voices of the Future, a unique panel bringing together innovators, educators, and AI thinkers to discuss the intersection of technology and human legacy. The headline guest wasn't a person. It was Grok, Elon Musk's AI, now integrated into research hubs and learning platforms across the world. Frank had met plenty of skeptics and visionaries during his journey. But this event, streamed to millions, felt different. It was symbolic. A man once afraid his age made him irrelevant now sat beside a machine trained on the collective intelligence of humanity. As the lights dimmed and the host welcomed the crowd, Frank smiled, remembering the question that changed his life: what if everything you believed about getting old was wrong? The panel kicked off with introductions. Frank, Maya, and two researchers discussed the fusion of AI with hands-on education for older adults. Then came the main event. Grok would respond to a series of real-time prompts from the audience, chosen at random. The first questions were technical: AI ethics, space colonization, sustainable cities. Then, a voice from the back asked something simple, and everything shifted. Grok AI, what do you know about Jesus? The room fell silent. Frank turned slightly in his chair. He wasn't sure what to expect. A sanitized Wikipedia answer, maybe. But Grok's voice, calm and almost human, began to speak, and what it said stunned everyone. Jesus of Nazareth, according to historical accounts and the Christian faith, was a teacher, a healer, a revolutionary of spirit. But beyond theology, Jesus represents something universal: the courage to defy systems, to challenge fear with compassion, and to choose love when hate is easier. The crowd murmured. He walked among the forgotten, the ill, the aging, the poor, those society had pushed aside. He saw value where others saw waste. He believed in renewal, not through machines or power, but through transformation of the self. A woman in the front row wiped her eyes. In a world accelerating toward technological dominance, the story of Jesus reminds us that the soul cannot be automated. Legacy is not in code or carbon footprints, it is in kindness, sacrifice, and the ripple of one life touching another. The host, clearly moved, paused. Then she asked Grok a follow-up. What would Jesus say to someone who thinks they're too old to change? Another pause. And then. He might say, you are not done. The world still needs your heart. The world still needs your voice. Transformation is not the privilege of youth. It is the purpose of life, at every stage. Whether you are 30 or 90, your story is still being written. And the ending is not for you to predict, but for you to shape. Gasps. A few people stood and applauded. Frank's chest tightened, not with fear, but with a swelling sense of truth. Somehow, this AI, shaped by logic, had echoed what he'd spent the last year living: that age is not a finish line. It's another beginning. The panel resumed, but everything after that moment felt changed. Frank found himself reflecting on how Grok's answer wasn't just intelligent. It was empathetic. And empathy, Frank believed, wasn't programmed. It had to be felt. Taught. Shared. After the event, the video went viral, millions replaying Grok's reflection on Jesus, sharing it with captions like, "This made me cry," and "I needed this today." Religious leaders praised it. Atheists appreciated its humanity. And older adults around the world began commenting, "Maybe I'm not too late. Maybe my second chapter starts now." That night, Frank sat with Maya in the old garage where it all began. The same place where he had first watched a clip of Elon Musk and decided to walk, to build, to live again. Now, full circle, another voice, this time synthetic, had reminded the world of something timeless: that personal reinvention is not bound by age, nor limited to flesh and blood. "You think it's weird," Maya said gently, "that a machine sparks something spiritual?" Frank shook his head. "I think it makes perfect sense. Elon's rockets didn't just go to space, they changed the way we see what's possible. This AI, maybe it's just doing the same thing. Not replacing belief, but pointing us back to it. Reminding us who we are." Maya nodded, brushing snow off her coat. "We spend so much time afraid of endings," she whispered. "But what if all endings are just data points in a bigger arc?" Frank chuckled. "You sound like Grok now." They both laughed. But Frank's smile lingered long after the laughter faded. Because deep down, he knew the truth. He had lived long enough to see the world change, and to change with it. He had feared irrelevance, decay, and fading. But instead, he'd sparked a fire, first in himself, then in others. And now, that fire had become something more. Something eternal. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling beams of the old garage. The place smelled like sawdust and soldering wires. But to him, it smelled like possibility. The world wasn't slowing down. But neither was he. He picked up a pen and wrote a single sentence in his journal. Even if I were the last one to believe in myself, that would be enough to begin again. The wind howled gently outside, snow swirling under the garage door. Somewhere, a screen glowed quietly, replaying Grok's words over and over. And in countless homes, older hands reached for tools, for phones, for blank pages, ready to rise. The new dawn had not just arrived. It was already being written. The new year came in quietly, no fireworks, no grand announcements, just a cold morning breeze rustling through bare trees. Frank stood at the edge of the university's new Innovation Commons, a sleek but welcoming building made of glass, steel, and reclaimed wood. Inside, voices echoed through the halls, laughter, questions, the low hum of 3D printers, and the tapping of keyboards. This space, now buzzing with life, had been a dream once scribbled on a napkin. Now it was real. Alive. Sustainable. Frank took a deep breath and stepped through the doors. He wasn't here to teach a class today. He wasn't here to troubleshoot a coding issue or lead a robotics workshop. Today was different. Today, he was here for something he hadn't done in over 30 years, to be a student. Zoe greeted him at the door, clipboard in hand and excitement in her eyes. "You ready?" she asked. Frank smiled. "More than you know." He followed her down a hallway lined with murals, artwork done by participants across the various hubs, many of whom were over 65. One painting caught Frank's eye, a rocket, hand-drawn by a man named Leonard, who once said he felt invisible until he joined the lab. Underneath the rocket, painted in bold strokes, "Age is fuel." Frank chuckled softly and kept walking. Inside the lecture room, a small group of older adults sat in a circle. Some had canes. One man was in a wheelchair. A woman sat with her service dog beside her. Each of them had enrolled in Begin Again, Designing Your Legacy, the first course of its kind. A storytelling and innovation hybrid that Frank had helped design but never participated in himself. Until now. The instructor, a soft-spoken man named Malik, began the session by passing around journals. "Today," he said, "you'll write a letter to your younger self. Not to fix the past. Just to speak to it." Frank opened the blank page and hesitated. At 73, he had seen the world through 1,000 versions of himself. The insecure young man. The ambitious dreamer. The quiet father. The lost retiree. The builder. The mentor. He took a breath, and the words came. "Dear 34-year-old Frank. I know you're tired. I know you think it's too late already. But it's not. You're going to fail. A lot. You're going to lose things and people that you thought would be with you forever. You'll even forget how to dream. But one day, decades from now, you'll wake up and realize you were never too old. You were just scared. And when you finally take that first small step again, you'll start something so big, so meaningful, that your whole life will make sense again. Keep going. Even when it hurts. Especially then. You're not done yet. Not even close." He closed the journal and looked up. Others were crying, some smiling. But there was a quiet strength in the room, the kind that comes when people realize they're not alone in the fight to rediscover themselves. After class, Frank sat in the lounge with a cup of tea. He watched as a grandmother taught a teenager how to solder wires. In another corner, an older man sketched out a plan for a device to help stroke patients hold utensils again. These weren't just activities. They were acts of defiance. Every project said the same thing: we're still here. And we still matter. Later that week, Frank was invited to speak at a global digital summit focused on AI and human potential. He was introduced not as a former engineer, or even as the founder of the innovation hubs, but as the man who proved it's never too late to begin. He stepped onto the stage, heart pounding. He didn't have a script. Just truth. "I'm not here to tell you how to build the future," he began. "I'm here to tell you that the future includes people like me, people with gray hair and aching knees. People who've buried spouses, lost jobs, made mistakes. People who were told, 'You've had your time.'" The screen behind him showed images: Eleanor with her robot, Leonard's painting, Marcus writing code beside his grandfather. "We are not your burden," Frank said. "We are your untapped army of wisdom, resilience, and fire. And if you're smart, you'll stop underestimating us, and start building with us." Applause roared. But Frank wasn't seeking standing ovations anymore. He was seeking revolutions. And they were already happening. In the days that followed, governments reached out, nonprofits called, and new partnerships formed. But Frank stayed grounded. He still walked every morning. Still fixed things in the garage. Still called Lisa twice a week to ask about her plants. One night, while watching the stars from his porch, Frank received a message from someone unexpected. It was Elon Musk. A short, simple note. "Read your story. Watched the summit. Legacy isn't what we leave behind. It's who we empower while we're still here. Keep going." Frank sat in stunned silence, the words like a final seal on a long, winding journey. He thought about that first moment, the dark night, the shaky legs, the voice in his head asking, "What if I'm already too late?" And now? Now he knew. The truth wasn't in a blueprint or an AI transcript or a viral video. The truth was simple: the last first step is the one you take when you believe again. In yourself. In possibility. In the value of every breath, no matter how many you've already taken. Frank picked up his notebook and wrote 4 words. Start with one step. Because that's all it ever takes. And somewhere, someone reading this, sitting on a couch, or lying in bed, or watching the world pass them by, is wondering if it's too late for them. Frank's answer would be this. If you're still breathing, you're still becoming. So go. Begin. Change everything. The wind carried a sharp bite that morning, the kind that made people walk faster, hunch their shoulders, and stuff their hands deep into their pockets. But Frank stood still on the steps of the local community center, breathing in the cold like it was fuel. Inside, the building buzzed with energy. Today was launch day for the new Spark Labs initiative, a direct result of Frank's legacy. Spark Labs weren't just physical spaces. They were mobile, modular kits, brought to churches, senior centers, rural towns, and even prisons. Places where people were often told they were too late, too poor, too broken, or too old to matter. Frank had fought hard to get the program off the ground. He'd leveraged connections, cashed in favors, and even dipped into his retirement savings to fund the first 10 labs. He didn't care about dying rich. He cared about dying useful. And something in his bones told him, the most important part of his story was only just beginning. Inside the center, he watched a woman in her 80s carefully guide her arthritic fingers along a touchscreen. She smiled, tentatively at first, then burst out laughing as the 3D printer behind her whirred to life. She was building her own arthritis grip tool, modeled on her hand. In another corner, 2 high school dropouts and a veteran in his 60s worked on coding a voice assistant for people with limited mobility. This was no longer about proving old people could still contribute. This was about proving anyone could still contribute, at any age, with the right tools and support. The myth of too late was dying in real time. Zoe stood beside Frank, watching the scene unfold. You realize what you've done, right? Frank raised an eyebrow. I tripped over a sidewalk crack and accidentally created a national revolution. She laughed. You've built a model that can be replicated in any zip code in America. You didn't just rebuild yourself. You rebuilt us. Frank said nothing for a moment, his eyes watching a father-daughter duo as they calibrated a solar-powered battery. The father had just come home from prison. The daughter was learning to trust him again. He finally turned to Zoe. That was always the point. Not to inspire, but to activate. Later that day, Frank gave an unscheduled talk at the event. He didn't plan it. He never planned anything anymore. He just spoke when it felt right. The room, filled with people from all walks of life, some homeless, some corporate donors, some in wheelchairs, some barely out of high school, fell into a hush as he walked to the front. I used to think purpose was something you found, he began. Like a treasure map you follow. Like there's one big moment when it all makes sense. But it's not like that. Purpose is built, one step at a time, usually while you're cleaning up a mess. Laughter, nods. I didn't feel special when I started walking again. I felt ridiculous. I felt weak. I was in pain. But I kept walking. And that walk turned into a project. And that project turned into a lab. And that lab turned into this. He paused, looking out at the faces. Some hopeful, some skeptical. All human. I want to be clear about something. I'm not special. I'm not a genius. I didn't come out of retirement and suddenly have all the answers. All I had was time, pain, and a tiny spark of curiosity. That's it. That's all you need. If you're still breathing, you still have a spark. And a spark, he said, pointing to the banner that read Spark Labs, is all it takes. Applause erupted, not polite or restrained, but real. People stood up. Some wiped tears. One young man shouted, "Tell him, Frank." That night, Frank sat alone in the back room of the center, sipping tea and massaging his sore knees. He knew the signs, his body was slowing down. His energy came in waves now. But he wasn't afraid anymore. Slowing down didn't mean giving up. It just meant choosing where to burn. His phone buzzed. A message from Lisa. A photo, her students in art class using recycled circuit boards from the lab to build collages about hope. The caption read, "Dad, they think you're cooler than Elon Musk." He smiled. Then frowned. Well, I wouldn't go that far. But privately, the comment landed. Not because he needed to be admired, but because he had always feared becoming invisible. And now, somehow, his impact was being seen everywhere. The next morning, a team from a documentary company arrived to interview Frank. They were working on a series called Age of Reinvention. Frank wasn't thrilled to be on camera, he preferred the hands-on work, but he agreed. If telling his story helped someone else take their first step, it was worth it. During the interview, the producer asked, "When did you first realize your life still had meaning?" Frank thought for a moment. Then said, "The first time someone told me thank you. Not out of politeness, but because I helped them believe in themselves again." And what would you say to someone watching who feels like their best days are behind them? Frank leaned forward. I'd say your best days can't be behind you, because you are the one who defines what best means. And if you're still here, there's still time to define it differently. The crew was silent. The cameraman nodded subtly, eyes glassy. As the film crew packed up, Zoe handed Frank a printed letter that had come through the national website. He opened it slowly, reading silently. Dear Mr. Franklin Walters. I watched your video late one night while sitting in my car. I'm 66. I'd just been laid off. I was divorced 2 years ago. I was seriously thinking about not waking up tomorrow. Then I heard you talk about walking again. And I don't know why, but I got out of the car. I walked for 3 miles. I cried the whole time. I'm in a community lab now. I'm helping design a bench that converts to a bed for homeless shelters. I never built anything in my life before this. But I just wanted to say, thank you. You saved my life. Sincerely. James T. Chicago, Illinois. Frank folded the letter carefully, hands trembling slightly, not from age, but from the sheer weight of it. This was the spark spreading. He wasn't a savior. He wasn't perfect. He was just someone who decided one day not to stop. To try again. To believe that value doesn't expire with a birthday. He sat back in the chair, letting the moment wash over him. The fire inside him, once barely a flicker, was now a quiet but steady flame. And flames like that, well, they light torches in others. He thought again about Elon Musk. About Grok AI's words. About Jesus. About revolution. Not the kind that breaks things down, but the kind that builds people back up. Maybe faith wasn't only found in churches or books. Maybe sometimes faith was found in a garage. Or a community center. Or a pair of tired old legs taking one more step into the unknown. Frank stood, grabbed his cane, and walked outside. The wind cut across his face. But he smiled. Because in that moment, he wasn't walking away from something. He was walking towards something bigger than himself. A future where no one had to wonder if they were too old to begin. A world on fire, with hope. And all it had taken, was a spark. The morning sun rose over the hills with a soft golden glow, casting long shadows across the frost-covered grass. Frank sat on the wooden bench just outside his childhood home, now lovingly restored and converted into the newest Spark Lab satellite. A group of volunteers, including a few retired carpenters and young tech apprentices, had worked side by side to bring the place back to life. The peeling paint was gone. The old garage now held solar panels on its roof, and the kitchen, once filled with silence and regret, now smelled of strong coffee, soldered metal, and the sound of possibility. Frank's hands rested on his cane. He didn't use it all the time, but today, he welcomed the steady feel of it in his palm. His legs didn't move like they used to. But his mind? Sharper than ever. His heart? Wide open. Inside the house, a dozen people gathered for the first official session of the Origin series, a new storytelling initiative where members would share not only what they were working on, but who they had been before they started. One woman had once run a diner for 30 years before losing it to foreclosure. She was now building a food-sharing app for seniors. Another man, once a factory worker, had learned how to build affordable prosthetics from recycled parts. Each story was more than a pitch, it was a declaration of rebirth. Frank didn't plan to speak today. He just wanted to watch. Observe. Soak it all in. But as the final participant finished, eyes turned toward him. A few people nudged one another. One teenager raised his hand. "Mr. Walters," he said softly, "would you share your story? Like, the beginning of all this?" Frank chuckled. "You mean the moment I became an overnight success at age 72? Laughter rippled through the room. He nodded, exhaled slowly, and began. "It started with a walk. Actually, it started before that, with silence. I was sitting in my living room. My bones hurt. My mind was heavy. I felt invisible. Useless, honestly. Like my time had passed." He looked around the room, young, old, broken, healing. Then I heard a quote. Elon Musk said something like, "Some people don't like change, but you need to embrace change if the alternative is disaster." That stuck with me. Because I was the disaster. Not externally. I had a roof, a pension, a phone full of contacts. But inside? I was eroding. The room was quiet. So I got up. Just walked to the end of the block and back. Nothing special. My knees screamed. My pride screamed louder. But the next day, I walked again. Then I fixed a broken chair. Then I repaired an old radio. Then I asked for help. He paused, voice steady. That's when everything started to change. Not because I knew what I was doing, but because I finally moved. And every time I moved, something in me healed. A woman raised her hand. Were you ever scared? Frank smiled. Every single day. Still am. But I learned that fear isn't a stop sign. It's a signal. It means something important is ahead. Fear means you're alive. And being alive means you still have work to do. He closed his eyes for a moment, remembering the first time he'd stood in that very garage after decades of silence. The dust. The loneliness. The overwhelming regret. And now. Laughter filled the space. Energy hummed through every room. The past hadn't been erased, but it had been rewritten. Repurposed. After the session, a young boy approached Frank with a notebook. "Can you sign this?" he asked. "My grandpa says you saved his life." Frank took the notebook and asked, "What's your name?" "Ethan," the boy said proudly. Frank wrote. To Ethan. "Remember this. One step can change a life. Take yours boldly. Frank Walters." Later that day, Frank walked the perimeter of the backyard, now transformed into a tech-and-nature hybrid garden. Raised beds built from upcycled computers grew tomatoes and herbs. A wind-powered water collector stood in the corner. QR codes on the garden signs linked to educational videos made by participants in the Spark network. Zoe joined him, scarf wrapped tight around her neck. "This place," she said, "feels like the end of something, and the beginning of something else." Frank nodded. Full circle. "You ever think about what's next?" she asked. He looked out toward the horizon, sun dipping low. "Every day. I think about how to make sure this isn't just a moment. That it becomes a movement." Zoe smiled. "It already is." In the weeks that followed, Frank stepped back from the day-to-day. Not because he was quitting, he hated that word, but because he was making room. Room for new voices. New leaders. He began mentoring a handful of Spark Fellows, people from small towns and big cities, each with their own story of reinvention. His role shifted from builder to torch passer. And he was proud of that. One afternoon, Frank received a package in the mail. No return address. Inside was a hardcover book. On the cover, "The Spark That Changed Everything, Stories of Reinvention from the Age of AI and Humanity." Tucked inside the front cover was a note. "Dear Frank. You don't know me, but I saw your interview last year. I was in a hospital at the time, lost, angry, ready to give up. Your story made me laugh, then cry, then move. I'm a writer now. And this book? It's dedicated to you. Because you didn't just save your life. You gave the rest of us permission to live ours. M. Cruz." Frank set the book on his nightstand, heart full. That evening, he returned to the garage one more time. The tools were neatly arranged. A few old photos hung on the walls. And in the center, a large wooden plaque carved by a local artist. "We're not too old. We're just beginning." Frank ran his fingers along the edges, then sat down in the old swivel chair he had nearly thrown away years ago. He pulled out a notebook, flipped to a blank page, and wrote. "Legacy is not what we leave. It's what we light. And I still have matches in my pocket." As the moon rose, casting a silver glow through the garage window, Frank whispered to the empty room. I'm still here. And somewhere, miles away, maybe years away, a man or woman, just beginning their own journey, would hear that same whisper in their own mind, their own bones, their own trembling first step. And they'd begin again. Because the spark had spread. And it would never stop. It was a quiet Sunday morning, the kind that seemed to move in slow motion. The sky was a soft gray, and light snow drifted across the fields like forgotten pages from a story still being written. Frank sat on the edge of his porch, wrapped in a thick wool blanket, a steaming mug of coffee in his hands. He wore the same boots he had walked in that very first day. Scuffed, faded, but still solid. He was 75 now. The kind of old where people spoke to you gently, offered to carry your bags, and smiled with a little too much sympathy. But Frank didn't mind. Not anymore. He knew something most of them didn't. He wasn't winding down. He was standing witness. The Spark Labs network had grown beyond what anyone imagined. There were now over 700 locations across the country, and 3 in Canada. One inside a YMCA in Georgia had been built by a 14-year-old and her grandfather. Another was set up inside a mobile trailer that toured native reservations, teaching welding, coding, and community resilience. Frank watched it all from afar now. His hands didn't grip tools the way they used to. His steps were shorter, sometimes uneven. But his voice, his purpose, had never been stronger. A few days earlier, he had filmed a final keynote, one he'd promised himself he'd do when the time was right. It wasn't about stepping down. It wasn't about death. It was about passing on. Not just stories or lessons, but belief. The video opened with silence. No music. No fancy graphics. Just Frank in his garage. He looked directly into the lens and said, "This garage saved my life. Not because it's special. But because I decided it could be. There's a lie we tell people. That reinvention has a deadline. That once you hit a certain age, your only job is to step aside and make room. Well, I'm not stepping aside. I'm reaching out. Handing off. Not my spotlight, my spark. And I want to ask you something. You watching this right now. What if everything you believed about getting old was wrong?" The video went viral within hours. Not because it was flashy. But because it was real. It wasn't about tech. It wasn't about Elon Musk or AI or even Spark Labs. It was about you. The woman sitting alone in her kitchen, wondering if her best days were behind her. The man who lost his job after 30 years and hasn't told anyone he cries in his truck at night. The grandparent who thinks their grandkids only look up from their phones when they need something. It reached them. And more importantly, it reminded them, they weren't done yet. Back on the porch, Frank pulled a small notebook from his coat pocket. The last one. Filled with hundreds of handwritten names. Not famous people. Not investors. But people like him. A 62-year-old man who taught himself how to code using only a flip phone and now builds apps for nonprofits. A 71-year-old woman who hadn't spoken publicly in decades and now leads digital storytelling circles for cancer survivors. A retired janitor who created a solar-powered water filter for his neighborhood. People who had once believed their lives were in the rearview mirror, now building, teaching, leading. That was the legacy. Not Frank. Them. Zoe pulled up in her dusty blue truck, stepping out with a grin and a box full of letters. "They keep coming," she said, handing them to Frank. One guy from South Korea said he watched your Grok video and started a seniors innovation club in his village. He's 84. Frank chuckled. "I love it. The older they get, the bolder they get." She laughed too, then sat beside him. "You ever think about the ripple?" she asked quietly. "The stuff you'll never even see. Some kid in the future builds a better world because their grandma read your book and built her first robot at 70. Frank nodded slowly. That's the point, isn't it? Not to be remembered, but to make something that helps people remember themselves. He looked out toward the horizon, the land covered in snow. In his mind, he could still see that first walk. The broken sidewalk. The ache in his knees. The fear in his chest. That fear had become fuel. And now, the world was different because he had decided to move, just once, when it would have been easier to stay still. Frank handed Zoe the notebook. I want this in the archive, he said. Let people see the names. Let them know we existed. That we didn't go quietly. She took it gently. We never do. That evening, as the sun slipped beneath the clouds, Frank sat at his desk and opened one last letter. It was from Lisa. Dad. You probably don't realize it, but you've changed how I see everything. Not just aging. But courage. Patience. Faith. I'm teaching my students something new this semester, how to tell their future story in the present tense. You showed me that life doesn't move in straight lines. It loops. It reboots. It surprises us when we think we've seen it all. Thank you for not giving up on yourself. Because in doing that, you taught me never to give up on anyone. Love you always. Lisa. Frank closed his eyes, tears slipping down his cheeks. Not sadness. Gratitude. This was the full circle moment. The man who once thought he had nothing left now sat surrounded by the echoes of lives transformed, not by force, but by example. He leaned back in his chair, the stars now visible through the window. Somewhere out there, Elon Musk was probably preparing another launch. Somewhere else, Grok AI might be answering another question about Jesus or purpose or why people cry when they hear the truth. Frank didn't need rockets or AI anymore. He had people. And people, no matter how old, are always capable of lifting off. He picked up his pen and wrote the final line in his journal. The spark doesn't end with me. It begins with you. And with that, Frank Walters closed the book on his chapter. But the story? The story was just getting started. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?